My name is Stephanie Solem. I am a professor of art, and I really want to welcome all of you near and far to the third of our 6 talks in the 2021 faculty lecture series. It's been so great to see in the participants list all kinds of alums and families, parents, and people from all over. So that's one really great benefit of doing this on this Zoom format this year. Not to be envisioned by the original founder of the series. This was in 1911, a faculty spouse by the name of Catherine Mariotti Pratt, who really wanted to, as she said, relieve the tedium of long New England winters with an opportunity to hear Williams professors talk about things that really mattered to them. So from these humble and lighthearted beginnings, the faculty lecture series has grown to become a very important forum for tenured professors to share their latest research and creative work with the larger community of the college. And as ever, just a huge thanks to Patrick Gray and to Veronica Bosley and to Carrie Green, whose support truly makes these series possible. And the warmest welcome also from my colleagues on the lecture committee, who I thank too, Siobhan Robinson and Greg Mitchell. A welcome to Jess Fisher, who is here to speak with us today. You can feel free today to ask her questions, written questions in the Q&A box, which will be open throughout the whole lecture. You can write while she's talking or afterward. And you're also welcome to raise your Zoom hand after the talk if you'd like to ask her a question with your actual voice, okay? And we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So before we start, a few words about our speaker. Jess is Associate Professor of English here at Williams and a widely published writer. She's the author of 2 collections of poetry, the first Frail-Craft, which won the 2006 Yale Younger Poets Prize, and the second is Inmost, which was awarded the 2011 Nightboat Poetry Prize. Her poems appear in journals such as the American Poetry Review, The Believer, the Bennington Review, the New Yorker, the Threepenny Review, Ten House, and the Yale Review. And her translations have been published in the New York Review of Books and the Paris Review. Jess was awarded the 2012 Joseph Brodsky Rome Prize in Literature, a Holloway Postdoctoral Fellowship in Poetry, and a research grant from the Hellman Foundation. She holds a BA from Swarthmore College and a Ph.D. from the University of California at Berkeley. So I'm really thrilled to turn the Zoom over to Jess, which feels somehow appropriate as a way of marking this day, right? This day to the date that we closed last March. And I think this was a year that many of us might have turned, some of us unexpectedly, to poetry or to this work of language, maybe in kind of new ways, to find some things that perhaps we didn't know we needed there, right? And it's just such a treat too to add this lecture to this already glorious day. For those of you not in Williamstown, you really wish you were. Actually, I think it's about 75 degrees outside. So all of it seems something like a gift, right? To mark this day with a bit of brightness. So Jess's faculty lecture today is entitled The Faraway Brought Close, Poetry and the Work of Feeling. So thanks so much, Jess. Take it away.
Thanks so much to all of you who are inside this afternoon. I encourage you to take your phone, if you have a phone, and take it outside to the beautiful outside. Such an opportunity, an honor to have the opportunity to talk with you all this afternoon. And it's also really been a gift to me to have the occasion to think about my own work over the last few weeks when so many other demands have called upon my attention. I was scheduled to give this talk last year in March. And as Stephanie has just reminded us, right, today marks the 1-year anniversary of when the WHO declared the coronavirus a pandemic. Little else remains the same, although the title that I gave to this talk that I envisioned giving last year, it remains The Faraway Brought Close, Poetry and the Work of Feeling. It's been such a difficult year, and I know for me and for probably you as well, the work of keeping the faraway close has only intensified over the last year. I wanted to start by reading a poem that I wrote on March 6th last year, almost exactly a year ago, in that strange moment before the lockdown. It's a part of an epistolary series that I've been working on with a friend, the poet Margaret Ronda. This one is from March 6, 2020. And it's a prose poem. So you'll hear in my work often that the work moves between a kind of more lineated poetry and maybe the work of a kind of almost storytelling. March 6, 2020. It already seems a long time since we stood in the rubble where the fill juts into the bay. Someday in the future, I will think back to us then, how we saw where sea touched earth, salt, sand. A way of framing things, I know that. Ever since the first class in college where we cut a rectangular hole out of a sheet of cardboard, and she said, to be an artist is to select. She said to impose the frame on what we saw so that it might become art, which means that I was taught that art excludes. I miss you. I see that through the frame. But I am torn now writing this between things. A book about the past lies open beside me, marking one writer's fascination with lives seen only through the shadows. Beneath this document, other windows are open, one to the article on the spreading virus, and one to the Decameron, which I have been meaning to read, and one to the grant application that would give me time to write. I am like a dragonfly flitting, like a fly landing here and there. I miss you. I am not at a precipice, nowhere near the sea, but grief is a watery thing, not mine, thank God, at the moment, but still it meets the ground and undermines the shoreline. My father just now on the phone saying that after his friend had died, his heart hurt. I didn't know in which way he meant. My heart hurt, he said, missing her. And the doctor I know and who knows me said he felt that way when his wife died, and that it was, in fact, his heart that was hurt. But she was only a friend, my father says. The doctor said he should have a stress test, only they aren't really very reliable. They can say there isn't a problem when there is one, and that there is a problem when there isn't one. And so the doctor who recommended a stress test said only if it still hurts when you've been walking on an incline. My father prefers the neighborhoods which are flat and meandering because they are built along the cliff, and therefore the edge they encounter cannot be subsumed to a grid. He likes to come to the view. But because he needs to know why his heart hurts, whether from illness or grief, he says he will walk the canyon or certain streets in the neighborhood which head uphill. He will not come to see us because his heart might be fragile now or might be in the future. And at his age, well, he doesn't take it for granted anymore. And I thought then of you, the way your heart hurt, the speed at which it felt to be beating, and how when they hooked you up to see what it was, they found that it was just what it is to be alive now, something always nagging. There is the stumbling sound of a hurry now as the girls, my daughter and her friends, rush downstairs. They are fascinated with murder. Jughead dead, but not dead. He faked his own demise so the preppies wouldn't kill him is basically how it goes. And when they are taught consent, they tell me, laughing as I show them how to peel garlic, they are taught to order pizza. Are you hungry and how do you like it? Which means that their love will be in language from the beginning, will be about knowing. I didn't know how to speak when I was first touched. It was electric. I was a current, something like that. Thinking this, but they descend, want the couch where I'm sitting, writing you. The oven timer has been beeping a long time, but I don't want to give them the couch, don't want to go turn off the timer. I want to remember that I was like a wire once, conductive, mute. Desire surged through me. Want to be that wire. What are you doing, they ask, and I say, I am trying to write everything. Iris has squeezed in beside Sylvie, then Mira and Aaron on the couch. On the love seat are Phoebe and Grace looking a little left out. It does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty. They are watching Clueless. I saw it with Esther or with Laura when it was just out, before I had become a conduit, when we thought the future would be a screen and would remember what you had in your closet. Where are they now? Laura would be an asset to any team, the website assures, but Esther is lost to me, though I remember everything about her, her middle name and last names, her Aunt Kasha and her fake British accent, and each long afternoon we spent in her rambling house, watching Inspector Gadget or flipping through porn in her closet. She wanted everything, had to choose. It's cool to know what's going on in the world, the brother says in the film, so I turn back to the paper. The only choice is to wait for death, one headline reads, along roadsides and in olive groves. Now the car lights bend around the driveway's curve, and Dylan is home from the basketball game in the town beyond the neighboring town. He is ravenous, a warrior returned from the field. When he has gorged himself and the bones are left scattered about his plate, he turns to what he must become, Macduff to some Macbeth in the fourth grade play. That great bond which makes crow to wing. Meanwhile, someone has matched the CDC guidelines on how to wash your hands to Lady Macbeth's out, out. So in the time that remains this afternoon, I want to try to give you a sense of the book that I've been working on in the time that I've lived in Williamstown. It's my third book of poetry, and it's called Daywork. It's in many ways born from the year I spent in Rome right before I came here. And I'll say just a few words about the book in advance of reading poems, because in some sense, the hard thing about moving between the poems and the sort of ideas that they come from, or that they're sort of tapping into more generally across a manuscript, it gets a little messy to try to move back and forth during the reading, I think. So I'll just say a few words about the book's concerns, and maybe they will come to be clearer as I read the poems. Hopefully that's true. So the dialectic of memory and absence animates all the poems of this book, which trace the various ways poetic labor keeps whatever is lost, be it a time, place, thing, or person, alive in the mind. Poesis thus joins in the work of salvage, making visible not only that which remains to be recovered, but also the erosions and erasures that rend the fabric of the legible. The resulting poems are obsessed with the lyrics' form-making ability, and also with questions of dissonance and rupture. Throughout these poems, an overarching concern emerges with the very materiality of lyric itself, with its particular means of traversing time and distance, and with its capacity to capture and captivate. And those of you who were able to hear Peter Murphy's wonderful talk on Sir Thomas Wyatt last night will have been thinking these questions of lyric already with us in the English department over the last day. Voice, like the other artifacts explored in this book, emanates from a body no longer present, and this disembodied voice reaches toward the other, likewise amorphous but real in the realm of the imagination. My book takes its name from the giornata, which is the section of wet plaster that can be painted in a single day. Sometimes in a finished fresco painting, you'll see the seams of adjacent giornate or days, an effect I like both because it points to the constraints of a body working in time and to the fractured nature of vision and story. And yet just as frequently, the evidence of time and labor, which disrupts the totalizing aspect of any image or narrative, cannot easily be seen. The book's title then is an attempt to translate the Italian giornata into English as a way of exploring the nature of revelation and concealment, and also of gesturing to the intersection between the individual subject, who encounters the world through a particular perspective and always through the lens of the now, and the monumental forms of art, literature, and history which shape our understanding of what was and what will survive. I will start to share my screen with you now because the book's title poem, which I'll read first, came into being as after I visited the what's called the Room of Helios, painted by Raphael in the Vatican Museum while it was under restoration. You'll see it in just a moment. Here's that beautiful beautiful room. It was the scaffold. So this is the lunette sort of above the midsection of the room. So there's a part underneath. I was there with one of the men who had been spending many years restoring these pieces. We were high up on the scaffolding, eye to eye with the painted figures, and I wanted to see how the work had been made. Only the master had fully covered his tracks. So I'll show you a few images. This is the sort of piece that we were looking at. These are the Huns, Attila's army encountering Leo, the Pope, and you see the angels interfering above. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Here you see how in the photograph of this image, the restorers have marked the different days. So each section, right, with the white line around it is a single, would have been painted in a single day. And it was that effect that I wanted to be able to see something of, and which was hard to see. In the poem itself, you'll hear this figure, the figure who leans back in the saddle, the horse beneath him, trying to get it to sort of stop rearing. You'll see a reference to that figure. Here he is in my image, close up. And you'll also hear reference to the caryatids, these female figures that seem architectural, right? They hold the room up. And so the lunette is just above these sort of structural or architectural features. The question of how the feminine comes into the poem. I was curious to see too, right, how the cartoon is translated onto the wall. So you'll see in this image the incising, for example, that would help the artist know what was to be painted in each section. And in this image, I thought it was moving to see both the sort of underdrawing on the figure to the left, but also on the right, the sort of scumbled face, which is enough, right? Representation gives just enough to read. And obviously these figures were not meant to be seen eye to eye. They were, they're at the top of the room otherwise. So, and here is the restorer showing me how to feel what you can't really see, which is the break of the day. Okay, so hopefully those images help to contextualize. I'm trying to stop. Oops. I'll share this image, I guess, with you too, since it just has come there. I'm trying to stop the share. These are contemporary frescoes made by my friend Frank Jackson. And so questions of, the fresco and the fragment living into the contemporary moment is also a great deal of interest to me. But I'm stopping the share so that I can read to you and you can hopefully see me. The poem is called Daywork. Close your eyes, he said, and took my hand. There was something he wanted to show me, the seam called the giornata, raised like a scar running through the fresco, which marks where one day's work ended, the next began. I wanted to trace that limit, to know where the painter had found an edge and stopped, the scaffolding descended and the brushes washed, the figure left to dry in the dark room, his one eye painted open that will never see the rearing horse he rides. You know the posture, you've leant back in the saddle, the beast beneath, you pulled at its reins and told it to quit. It can't quit, the bit in the mouth and no sight in his eyes, seen and yet blind. This was the drama he wanted to show, don't you think? Or think of the woman holding the room up, the stone-like caryatid with her gray, empty eyes. Have you ever felt like that, like you were to keep very still while the others move around you? In birth, I remember the midwife took my reins. Is that right? She held me here and there and reached inside. She was touching my baby. I had nothing to do but let it happen. I let it happen, so well trained, really, a vehicle. You ride me or drive me. Oh, but if you are the head, I am the neck. I will turn you to my advantage, will make you see what is wrought through me. The next poem that I wanted to share with you is a poem that also deals with fresco and which describes a little bit the sort of the giornata again. But it's interesting to see that, you know, art occurs not only in the sort of monumental spaces like the Vatican, but also in, you know, this is something I experienced in a tiny town in a mountain village in northern Italy, where frescoes were left in little chapels sort of at the outskirts of town. And so that the practice is very much, was one that was disseminated throughout Italy. It's a poem called Peel, and it's another prose poem. Because the child is slight and new to his task, it sounds like a half-hearted attempt, though from the way he ran from the barnyard to the chapel, taking the 4 steps 2 at a time, it seemed that he hoped to make the bell peal. But it's a small bell, and he's still a small child, though his name suggests stature. No one will hear this ringing, tinny and private. And so his grandfather follows behind to show him how to throw his body into the task, riding the rope downward and letting it jerk back free again and again. Since it isn't meant to tell the hour, he rings it at will 30 or 40 times. When he tires, the clapper does not strike, but rather rolls around the rim like a dog in need of water lets its tongue loll. This is the world now, the chained dog lunging to bark around the corner, vines growing through a broken window. What was it then when the chapel was new, its rock altar dragged into place, the walls skimmed with slaked lime? Not a question exactly, but still I would like to know. Time, the essence, then as now, pigment seeping into the wet plaster, the day's work marked out in advance, therefore each segment of the fresco called a day. Christ in a bath, his wounds raw, and below him the mother and child and saints to her left and right. Elsewhere, bits of color uncovered from beneath the whitewash in patches a few centimeters long, blood dripping from a foot and across the chapel, a few squares of an interlocking design. What you see is never the whole story, of course, though there is a story. If this were another time, a dog barking, fruit hanging heavy on some tree, a pregnant woman walking uphill slowly, or the bell ringing the town to rosary, if this were now, time as it has always been, but something changes even still, though I can say, I see what they saw and can feel what they must have felt. This was their one town. They were born in it or came across the mountains on foot or horseback, fearing something or wanting something. Stones laid together made a town high above other towns. They built a castle, the neighboring town a tower. Who could say which was better? Winter fell heavily on both, the snow in drifts against the stone walls, heavy on the tiled roofs, the tiles often falling with the load. Because the damage was inevitable, they left a hole in the roof through which the snow fell, an unblinking eye as if held open for irrigation, a ladder through the hole to repair the damage when spring came. So it's probably inevitable that I was thinking about entropy and destruction and harm living as I was in this sort of city of a city of empire and empire's destruction and rebuilding sort of time and again, and that sort of palimpsest of Rome has been well described by many people. I was also thinking about the way that the body fails, because one of my closest friends from graduate school, the poet Hilary Gravendike, was dying in her mid-30s. And so the next couple of poems I'll read are ones that are for her and about her. She died of a problem of the lung, a sort of perforation of the lung, which is described in the first poem. And the first poem, these were poems written when my kids were really young. So you'll hear, or at least this one is, so you'll hear the sort of querulous children's question here. There's a line from the poet Sir Thomas Wyatt in this poem, which you'll hear as well. So it's called Hive. In their darkened cells, locked in with wax, the larval bodies hardening. Are they scared in there? The children want to know. Does it hurt to change? How am I to know? When I think of their hive, I think of her lungs honeycombed by illness. That was the word she used for it long ago. Since in a net I seek to hold the wind, Wyatt wrote, meaning he could not. This next poem I wrote after she had written, after a double lung transplant had sort of begun to fail. She had written sort of to say her time was close. So I'll see if I can get through it. This poem, like the last, is curious about questions of transformation, of metamorphosis. And I was reading, as many of you I'm sure have done, Ovid's Metamorphoses at the time, and thinking about transformation within matter, and a kind of alchemical figure is mentioned here in this poem. I think that's all you need to know. It's called Speedwell. And many of the poems in this book are longer poems. I think in some sense that question of pushing forward past the sort of expected length of the lyric poem was as part of the project of this book. So I know it's hard to listen on Zoom. I hope it is able to come across. It's called Speedwell. The sun goes down, we say, but that's not right. Still, night falls on the tragedy's final act, the first star like a pinprick in tin. I was looking for a metaphor, for someone who knows the way. On the shelf, a book titled The Sight of Death. On the shelf, a little bottle to keep age away. They made their books to many men full dark in poesies, parables, and in metaphors also. This from the ordinal of alchemy. Given change, he sought it in a book he called Believe Me. In the dark of night, I trace his script. Stars bore through the black, shadow or shade elemental also. How can you be alive, you growths of spring, Whitman wonders, fed by death, in the poem my friend loves, the field itself, some kind of bed. For what sleep? She wrote to say that this spring may be her last. I lay on the damp earth in the grass interwoven with the dozens of plants I'd thought nameless, the little white daisy-like flowers and the tendrils of the tiny striated blue ones, which have, as it happens, not only the one named Speedwell, but many more besides, bird's eye, cat's eye, farewell and goodbye. You were to pin a posy of it onto the beloved's coat before a journey, the boat leaving for what distant shore. The passengers reluctant to go, as is the poem that knows it has to come to an end and refuses, like a child stalling before bed, not tired yet or scared of the dark. Every death takes a body. It's hard to know what it leaves. Already it has stitched its signature into her chest, the scars that chart her illness like lines on a map that show where the ship has sailed. Struck rock, found the ocean too deep to anchor, and so drifted windless, the sea like the earth, teeming with the dead. And from those graves, these flowers, which every spring have bloomed, discreet as the beloved, and if we are to believe Whitman, and why not, of the beloved as well, hair or tongue or the unseeing eyes that were the color of chestnuts and are no more. Why not lie in the grass, in the sun, taking the flowers as proof that nothing dies? This is what the poem's after all, a figure, no matter how thin, that might make these reversals in matter seem like a switch flipped on and off and on. A child playing day and night, dark and light. A single life like that, or not at all. If in the bag the phone rings and goes unanswered, will she feel like that, calling from far away? So the next couple poems I wanted to share with you really think about the practices of archaeology and the sort of trace elements that we might find there. And they read sort of a connection over ever more vast distances. I'm very aware in my teaching, especially in my teaching of eco-critical writing, that we are currently leaving traces that will be read by future generations, and not in a positive way, generally speaking. But the work of reaching backwards into history is also one that that I've been interested in. This next poem is called Shadow Play. It's from this poem that I took the title for today's talk. And I wrote it during a talk that I attended at the Clark. So you'll hear some of the discourse of painting come in here as well. Shadow Play. Autumn, light. Under what sun were you born? Did you grow? Under what king? What tyrant? What window, what door, the 4 horsemen, the 7 sisters at rest. Whether 1,000 years, 5,000 is a long time. Still a stone held in the hand will warm. The same goes for bone. Who fed you a hand extending the spoon? What fed you, music, art, or light? Was there an empty room, shadows cast upon the floor, the boards liquid with sunshine? And was that how you imagined the soul, open, ready, very still, even if the day itself was windy? Or was it for you like the wind, tempestuous, infiltrative, lifting the fallen leaves? Did you think about it at all? Many lights cast many shadows so that the hand on the paper is reflected time and again, the knuckles like the mountains, one range after the next, and each a fainter version of the same color, so that our sense of the far away is brought close, the brush dipped again into the water, a little less paint for the next stroke, the path curving away to the right, around the hillock, into the copse. A little great gate breaks the view, beyond the beyond, given as a stripe of blue. This is how I came to know you, as a smudge or trace, thumbprint on the potsherd, residue in the flask. This next poem also begins with the sort of archaeological fragment. It's a poem born out of a really wonderful moment in my own upbringing of pedagogy. When I was in 7th grade, I took a class in junior high school where the history and the English teacher worked together, and the history teacher was friends with somebody who was doing a dig at a British site where there was just a lot of Roman coins, and sent to each child in the class a coin that we were supposed to sort of clean and then identify. And from that sort of small aspect of the sort of physical past, of course, we began to learn about the Roman occupation of Britain and all the rest. But it was through the sort of touch of that object that history opened in a certain way for me. This poem begins there, but it doesn't end there. In any case, it's called Hinge. When I was a child, I was given a coin caked in dirt. Tell me, she said, from whence came this coin and whom did it serve, its mint or its king? Served in a cake, or for a cake was it traded? So I was ushered into the corrosive questions, each one hinged, as if there might be some movement, a door shut then opened, and behind the knob, the agent of change. But either the screws came loose and the door fell askew, the tongue flapping free, or the hinge had rusted shut, and I was dumbfounded. In either case, it was I who had broken what I should have opened, as if a bull in a shop or led to the slaughter. Come along, pretty heifer, said the priest who led me, and when I tried to speak, I heard the bellowing. Who pities the beast, its eyes wide and wild, that braces for death and hopes to be changed? 3 wishes she gave me, and along with them the stories of those who had squandered their wishes by wishing, scattered to the winds, and the 4th wind left hungry. Still it sweeps past my door, crying, mine, mine. So I'll read just, if there's time, I'll read just 2 more poems this evening. They're both a little bit longer, so I'll see if I can get through both of them. And Stephanie, you'll text me if I'm out of time. This first one owes a huge debt of gratitude to Drew Jones, who manages Hopkins Forest, and who invited some people, just the community, to come out into the forest on a very cold autumn evening to help tag the saw-whet owls that he was recording as they passed through the area. It's called Night Song. You'll never know what became of me in the dark, how my body opened to what or to whom. There the same sky, the same sun shone. Each star we saw was itself a sun, each moon as cold as the longest night, and stone. One side was much farther away than the other. Certain branches, when bare, framed the view. The long days of summer with its great foliage, its flocks and herds, had erased the desire to be a self alone. Sometimes on the bus, I felt like a stowaway in other lives, looking into the soul of each passenger. How, you ask, given that the soul, if it exists, cannot be seen, is like the bird hidden in the bush, the air you breathe. You take it in, nevertheless. I studied their hands, the laborers headed home, kids on their way out for the night. Beneath the skin, the riverways that lead to the heart. I caught their eyes, held them there a while. There was no one I could not love. When the wind clattered through the oak trees and the last milkweed seeds clung to the wire screen and the crickets sang their wild song at nightfall, I thought everything was saying goodbye, that I should listen more closely. I wanted to throw the window open to that cold, take in whatever was left outside. The leaves of the aspen already so few, though they are not lonely, and in the ravine a net stretched wide to catch the saw-whet owls in their migration. There in the moonlight I saw one shining, lured to the snare by its own call played back. Later, under black light, I felt the rapid heart beating in my hands, spread a wing to tell its age, the dun feathers fluorescing the color of sunrise or sunset, the breast soft as milkweed tufts. Weighed and banded and then let go, it flew back into its anonymous life. It had survived capture, was ready to hunt. The night was dark as the future and very cold. It drove us inside, but something stayed with us of that strange race. Their eyes like citrine, their few ounces, nonetheless weight enough to hold a heart. Okay, I'll close tonight by reading a poem that really attempts to provide or make an atmosphere rather than a narrative. And I hope that, I hope it will work for you. It's a poem in 2 sections and it's called Thrall. 1. If vibrant, if a little older now, if homesick or homebound, if original, if originary instead or in a cloud, if whatnot, if rupture, if seam or seamless. If the other closer now, the earbuds, the sparkling band, the intrigue of privacy, if vegan or virgin, if bearded and pierced, if pierced and shaved, if raised. If sorrow buckles the body as heat buckles steel, if the fifth floor collapses onto the fourth, if undone, the rift opening within, if the pen gripped in the hand or the hand loose as the tongue, the subject an object suddenly, the matter of it, as if the edge of a pink bra showing, a nipple held high as if to mean fullness, if hungry and then full, the other inside, if the other inside, as flesh and symptom, if the power of watching, the power to continue without knowing, unknown. If the other beloved, the transient ridden or the sliver untoward, if honey not butter, if butter not egg, if egg not fish, if fish not flesh, if the cage is safer, if safety in numbers, if the state unthinkable, the state of affairs. 2. If there was a memory that unchanged altars, sand and the sea, or the wind-funneled avenue, as at the heart of a pearl, some irritation. If the shape of a rose accidental, ocular, if the philosopher's eye unlike any other, if push and then shove, the music beginning, if E and not A, if J before E, if the other's beloved, if he's gone by the way. If violence a mother of beauty's bounty, the layered nacre iridescent as the caustic clouds of polar winter. If earnest and hungry, the right hand pouring and the thin stream of milk seems light's very source. If seeking or forsaken, the language unflowered, lifted and tossed as leaves in a squall. If desire undid the shape of your seeing, the feeling unbidden, the book almost ended, could it be there could be, if another mind greater, a thought for that field, each separate blade blowing? If you're born forth on rhythm, the body now tired, the other another, the shirt sleeves unfurled, broken down on the parkway, hungry, belated, the car overheated, the cottonwood drifting. If the young have more fun, if young love was sweeter, if hunger's insatiable, if the bright orange means danger, if each to her own, if the children are grown, if the words grow strange in my mouth, a crypt in my knowing. Is that the subject again now, the shadow premonitory that rides once again beneath the penman's right hand, hides itself in the ink of the nib? Will I return then to wander, the texture of nighttime, the red lines on menus, the orange bars on roadblocks, to wonder how will we mourn the mother, under what omen, a flag or a sign, the mean wind blowing? And again, the strange thought, where does it come from that stitched to your breast was a ribbon of satin? Hunger undoes us. We've known it, we know it. Clatter of silverware, rattle of thought, the sound of the feet clicking on pavement, a rhythm I like. What is it? Strange birdie, it's calling in springtime. Await, undid me, someone is wanting. I know that there's time, a time of frustration. Hustle me hard, the music a burden. He ducks under the bar, he is inward and outward. In the mania of night, the color of bottles, the flatness of painting, sharp cry of children, the sound that defines me, no such promise, time's sleeping. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jess. So this sounds too clinical after that, but I was about to say this will be available on willynet.org for those of you who would like to watch this again, and also the Williams YouTube channel, and you can pass this information out perhaps to others you know. And I bring that up because as a person maybe better with images than words, I know I'm going to want to go back and hear some of this again. This was really great. So if there are questions, as I mentioned before, you can raise your hand if you prefer, or the Q&A box is also open for questions. And I wanted to start off with just a thought about the poem that you read, that March 6th poem. And it seemed as though this language is describing this kind of crossing a line in time, perhaps, that being alive is going to mean this hurting of hearts, and then love is going to mean something that is confined to language. And I was really struck by that, this idea of language being blunted versus this kind of electrification that you're talking about, this current. And it just made me want to ask you if you could talk about your experience in this world of kind of language without bodies and without contact and without everything else, as someone who works with language, but probably has never had this experience of been kind of being deprived of the rest.
Yeah, such a beautiful question, Stephanie. So, I mean, I feel like the book, right, that I've been working on for a long time in a different context has really just reanimated two feelings I have. One is that contact is sort of everything for us. Emily Dickinson has this line, "Contact is crisis," but it brings us into some sort of resonant togetherness, which I think we probably all miss quite a lot. And so the idea that we would come into knowledge, especially the knowledge of pleasure and of the body through touch, right, is something I'm sure we all sort of know intuitively. Language finds its way into description, but in some sense, if I'm holding on to the question correctly, Stephanie, and please tell me if I'm not, but the work of lyric is in some sense to deal with abstractions and to be able to bring intimacy even without embodiment. And so I feel like maybe that's what I'm trying for in the last poem. Like I'm wondering, can you electrify language? Can it be a current? And that's, I'd be curious to hear what other people think, but, there's so much beyond what we can say we know. And so the languages of sensation and of perception and so on are really crucial to me, as I'm sure is obvious from this talk.
Okay, thank you. And great, this is a bit related, but there is just a kind of an open question of someone wanting to just have you talk a little bit more about that final poem.
Well, part of what I want to say is just thank you to this community. I think all of you with whom I've been in conversation these years know the trace of yourself in this work. Certainly, I'm deeply indebted to all of my friends who are makers of various sorts and who think about both the world of literature, but also the world of the visual. I wrote this poem the first time I went down to New York after getting to Williamstown, and I had about 4 hours to myself, and I was just turning 40 that year. So I turned 45 tomorrow. I guess it was a different moment when I was a little bit younger. And I had just been to such a stimulating talk here on campus, had driven with friends to New York and was in the city on my own. And I wrote it sort of all in a journal as I sat in a restaurant and just watched the city unfold. So it's very much a pre-COVID poem. And I don't really know how to talk about poems. I think that that's part of the difficulty of giving a talk when you're a poet, talking about your own work, is that I really just want the work to be able to move and to be sinuous. So I don't know what more to say about it, except that it tries to take in everything, right? And I think that that's the one thing I feel very much about, both about fresco painting, right, which attempts to make painting into something equivalent to a surround sound. But also, in some ways, the project that I've been working on, I see as a kind of feminist project. There was a moment when I was a young mom and I had just won the Rome Prize. So it was a good moment in my career. I had 2 books out and I was in Rome, and a very, very famous poet came to me, at some event, and he said, well, it's too bad that you won't be able to write for the foreseeable time. You've overcommitted yourself to mothering and to teaching and to everything else. And I just thought, I've got to figure out forms that allow for distraction, that allow for excess, that are about the sort of reverberations of contact, and that can stretch the whatever we understand the lyric to be, that can stretch that. So that's sort of something that I'm trying to do in this poem, which I think is about being enthralled. It's about holding in thrall, which, the etymology of that word has to do with slavery. It has to do with being held in a way that's not completely open, like volition isn't completely yours, but nonetheless there's desire and movement. So hopefully that helps to answer.
Yeah, that's great. Beautifully explained. Here we have a couple questions from the audience.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi,
Can you
Pete.
hear me?
I
Hey,
can.
Jess. First, thank you for that reading. It's sad not to be in a room with everyone listening to you read, but I'm in a very beautiful setting, looking out from the Oakley Center, listening to you read, and it was kind of a sublime experience, to the extent that Zoom can be sublime. So, thank you. This question, it's a little bit actually about distraction, and I was thinking about the bookend poems here, and the kind of the kind of headlongness of thrall, and the opening poem. I think that's the one with the sleepover going on, and Archie and clueless. And it was in part, I was thinking about parenthood and motherhood, and to put this really bluntly or kind of funnily, like what can the things that you learn from a fresco and those kinds of immersions, right? What feel like really immersive experiences, and of gazing upon this and engaging in various forms of ekphrasis and thinking hard about that enduring form of painting. And I love your description of it as a surrounds, trying to create a kind of surround or surround sound. But a sleepover is another kind of surround sound. And what is to be learned from Archie and what is to be learned from Clueless, versus what is to be learned from a fresco. I mean, those are different kinds of different forms of opportunities for knowledge, and from different phases or moments or periods of your life. And I think it's probably just an extension of what you were talking about just a moment ago, about that the lousy thing said to you by this famous poet.
It's a hard question, because I think one can feel a little foolish when one gives one's life over to being a poet. Like, why? What is that as a job? And I've been incredibly lucky to be able to sort of define for myself why that work matters. I think that I think it matters to me both that we're able to think about what lyric, or the sort of what we might think of as high art, the ways of framing the world, and the ways that, especially in lyric, for example, that time can be crossed. Like, all of that matters to me a great deal. I think that it matters for reasons that are sometimes hard to define, right? It matters to be able to think empathetically through history and into futurity. And I feel like I train myself to be able to imagine future times, the time which will be marked by my own sort of non-existence, right? I train that ability by sort of practicing on history, right? Can you reach backwards? But in each case, what one wants, I think, is, or at least what I am so moved by, is the trace of bodies living in time, and the always contingency of our mark making, of what we can make that holds, and I love being in the world. I love being surrounded by it. I also find it I mean, we live in a, as Betsy Colbert has pointed out, we are a biocidal species, and what we make is not always very positive. And so, art gets to, like in my imagination, art gets to still remain on the side of good, I guess, in some ways. But I think your question has so much in it, Gage. I'll love to have a coffee with you and talk more about this. I think it matters to me that there's less and less differentiation in lyric, in particular, between what we might think of as high and low. And I think that the dedication to the prose poem is part of that. If there's something particular about our language and its phrasings, surely that can come across in prose as well as in poetry. So, maybe as I get older, I'm wanting a more kind of democratic space. But I don't know if that really answers your question. We can talk more later.
Okay, one more question from the Q&A. It feels like the poems inspired by the Italian fresco paintings are interested in the day-to-day craft and workmanship of that kind of making, alongside the day-to-day realities of crafting poems out of experience. Has that project influenced how you view your own craft?
Yeah, thanks, Blair. That's such a great question. The fresco painting is interesting for me because you have to both anticipate the shape of the thing in ways that are difficult for a poet to do, right? We work a little bit into a dark space of not knowing what poem will come next or something like that. But in any case, right, the idea that you return to the work and that there is something kind of workmanlike about the practice. And that, I guess the other piece that I'm really interested in fresco painting is that, you make what will suffice. It's not studied in the way that a painting on a canvas or a wood panel would be, right? That the speed has to be part of it. And so really what you need to be able to get across has more to do with gesture and movement than it does with exactitude, right? And so I guess that's the main goal of these poems is to be able to move with and through gesture and a kind of Gage used the word headlong. I think that that's true of this book in general, wanting that to be part of it. Anyway, thank you all so very much for spending your afternoon with me. I really wish I could see you all, and but I look forward to talking more later with all of you all.
That's great. So maybe we can, I love the idea of following up in smaller spaces together somehow. Right?
Yeah.
The link for the Williams YouTube channel, I think, has been put into the chat. Anyone, this is Stephanie Solom. You feel free to email me if you want me to send you this information where you can find the recorded versions of the talks. And I hope that you will join us on March 18th. Coming up is Kate Stroud, who is Associate Professor of Psychology, and she's going to speak on understanding the interplay of stress, relationships, and biology, implications for the development of depression and anxiety. So please join us once again. And Jess, thank you so very much for this gift on this beautiful day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Stephanie.